Hello, everyone. Welcome back for the first time to Back Issue Banter, Backlog Banter's Comic Book Club. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm joined by Tucker Hazel and Abram Buhner. And for this episode, we read Hawkeye Kate Bishop Volume 1, Anchor Points. And we're here to talk about it. We'd like to know your thoughts. Toss them in the comments below. And if you're not subscribed, just do that while you're down there. Like this video while you're down there. Just scroll down a little bit further. There's a link for our Discord server where you can talk about more comics with us. Give us suggestions for what comic we should read next. All sorts of different things. But fellas, let's talk about our very first comic for this comic book club. Isn't that fun?
Yeah, we're getting it
very
started.
fun. And I would note, not to append onto your intro because it was already beautiful enough, but people should stick around to the end of this episode because we'll be announcing next week's comic also. So if you want to be in the loop, gotta watch all the way through the video.
Of course. But fellas, this was my first time reading Kate Bishop Hawkeye. I knew basically nothing about the character. I'm getting get a little ramp up for that series coming in November, I believe. December.
10th, I think.
Oh, okay. But but I really like this. I really had a fun time with these first 6 issues. And I love Kate Bishop as a character already. I think she has that classic Marvel snarkiness, but I think there's a level of of immaturity in the way that she operates as a superhero that's very fun and endearing. And I'm sure she overcomes, and it becomes more endearing to see her grow as a character. But I want to know what you two thought.
Well, so it's my first time reading this also. I am familiar with Matt Fraction's Hawkeye run, which this is associated with. I don't remember if I read all of it. If it wasn't all in Comixology Unlimited, I probably didn't, but I've at least read and enjoyed a good portion of that arc. So I was excited to hop into this. I like Kate Bishop as a character. Coming into the side of Volume 1, I'd say I'm pretty indifferent on this storyline. I like Kate, but I find myself not particularly compelled necessarily by her brand of humor all the time. And I think that the situations we find ourselves in here in Volume 1 aren't of a consistent quality. For me, as we'll get into, when you introduce Jessica Jones into the picture, that kind of dynamic where she plays the goofier partner to the more straight-laced Jessica Jones, I think that dynamic kind of raises up the comic, even though I think that plot is definitely weaker than what we get in the first 4 issues.
Yeah.
So on the whole, I'd say I'm pretty mixed, but it's a quick read. It's an enjoyable read. It's got beautiful artwork. So I still enjoyed it on the whole, I'd say.
Sure.
This is my second time going through it. I was able to very heartily recommend it to the both of you, which is, I think, why we inevitably ended up reading it. I read this a couple of years ago when I was really getting into comics for the first time. I read it just off the heels of the Matt Fraction run, because this is a direct sequel. It's a continuation of that story. At the end of that, Kate leaves for LA, and then this picks up right as she's arriving in LA, setting up her own private investigative business. And I think that, for me, is why I think this story is so interesting. When it boils down to it, there are a lot of things that you can comment on that are pretty below average for this, or at least, mediocre. The villains of this, both of them, are bad. The plots overall are pretty flimsy, and the side characters are just okay. When it comes down to Kate Bishop, the location, the style, the tone, I think it all works really well in establishing something that has its own unique place in the Marvel universe. You have Kate constantly referencing the fact that she's the second Hawkeye and how people interact with her, and that I think that's a really fun spin on hero. You have each issue starting with sort of a case file descriptor with her own little notes and stickies on it and stuff. There's a really engaging tone that fits her sense of humor, and that's why I love this series so much. And I think my love for it comes from having read the entirety of it. There's 16 issues in the entire run, and I've read that entire thing. But this first arc is good. I think it's a solid establishment of her character in LA. But for those specific arcs, I don't know if they're necessarily the strongest that they could be.
Sure. Well, Tucker, you brought up the villains of the piece, and I'd agree with you that they're pretty weak. I mean,
they're bad.
They're very quite bad. I mean, we get the aggregate is the big rip. I think Kate refers to him as the rip-off Hulk, who
third-rate Hulk. I think
third-rate Hulk, who siphons the hateful energy off of these cult members that he interacts with.
Mhm.
And he's not so great as I think just the scenario that he's placed in, where he's defeated with the Sound of Music, literally the film Sound of Music being viewed nearby. And I just think that's great. I think there is some like wacky situations, because they could very easily make this like a straightforward like just like a crime syndicate that Kate Bishop has to go up against. But no, she goes up against a guy who has hate absorbing superpowers that turns him into a muscle bound troll, and a dragon that her and Jessica Jones have to fight against. That's actually an Inhuman. I think that is really interesting to put Kate Bishop in those sort of situations. Whereas, I is Matt Fraction's Hawkeye more of it just him going up like against this crime syndicate?
Yeah, basically
Okay.
entirely.
Sure, but I do appreciate those wackier things being thrown in there, and Kate Bishop being thrown against them.
Yeah, the reason. So my thing is, I think the reason her character is interesting in the context of these first issues is the fact that she is kind of struggling with her identity of being a small time superhero who thinks she's bigger than she is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so while I think that the villain is absolutely contrived for the first four issues,
Mhm.
the fact that it takes place basically in and around a college campus, I think is nice. I like that we're grounding it, we're keeping it local, we're introducing characters on this scale. I think it fits Kate, and I think it fits the way she's trying to discover the kind of the where she sits amongst the other heroes. I think that's
Mhm.
very interesting. Officer Riviera, Detective Riviera coming in and always telling her, okay, you got to get your license. I don't have $200 to get my license. I
Yeah.
think her sort of status as trying to transcend amateur is what makes her interesting, and why I was able to overlook the fact that he just gets bigger when he hates people and like puts stickers on them. It's
Yes.
it's not great, but I think the world she's placed into in that story works more.
Mhm.
But when we kind of on a dime switch, we've got Jessica Jones. I think that works a lot for her dynamic with Kate. But we're going up against a singular Inhuman, which I think again is on the right scale for her. But she's like this big dragon transformation. It feels out of place, and so I just think that I would describe this first volume as being uneven in a lot of different respects, both
Sure.
in terms of pacing and tone and scale and everything. But it is the through line is the more technical element of how this comic was presented and how it was created, because
Mhm.
the art is consistently beautiful. I
So
love this
what a great
style.
art style.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and there's a lot of great flourishes. I think the writing I'm so on. I think when Kate is working off other people, her style of humor and narration works better. But again, Tucker, your point about the case file intros, her identifying different points of interest in an environment when she enters a room. I think
Yeah.
all of those things are very clever and help tie together what feels otherwise kind of messy to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was saying earlier about the villains being weak is that specifically the big action sequence villains that they have to fight are weak characters and don't have very interesting stories. However, I do think that first villain, Aggregate, which is a dumb fucking name, is just a cap on what I think is a relatively interesting scenario. Her discovering her first case and having to be caught up in something a little bit larger, and grabbing in a bunch of disparate characters to sort of form her own little fucking Scooby-Doo team to solve things. All of that is really fun, and it sets up this world that she's in, and building her relationship with Rivera, and how she keeps bumping into different characters. She's like, oh, God damn, it's that guy again. All of this quickly establishes like the world around her. She's got her place on the corner that's across from Ramona's shop, and she doesn't have parking there, and she doodled her own eye to put on the thing. There's a really great sense of place in terms of the location and the art style, everything coming together, and the people around her. But when you do throw in, okay, we have to cap this off with a big muscly fight because it's a superhero comic, that's where it feels out of place.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and I think the pacing is a little bit weird in this volume because it's a first arc and then a mini arc, obviously between larger things. And as you said, the inclusion of Jessica Jones, I think it does further her character a little bit in terms of being able to bounce off of a more experienced, both superhero and private detective. But that does make it feel a little bit uneven because you have 4 issues and then 2 issues that aren't a larger story. So that, I mean, I don't know how to reconcile that because I like when they do shorter, 1 or 2 shot stories, and they have to put those somewhere, so might as well tack it on to the end of the first arc. But if you're reading this as 6 issues, it does feel a little bit jarring at the end.
Sure. I'd like to talk about the setting in a more macro sense. So this is set on the West Coast in Los Angeles, Venice Beach, I think specifically. And from what I understand, I know of the West Coast Avengers in a
cursory sense.
In a cursory sense, yes. But from what I understand, it is sort of unique for a superhero character to be set here as opposed to New York City, which is where 98% of the superheroing is done in the Marvel universe. And there's characters who draw attention to that. It's like we just do things differently here, and it makes me interested in the rest of the Marvel Comics universe as a non-adept comics reader. As like, yeah, people are just used to like superheroes doing whatever, investigating whatever, stopping crimes however they want in New York City. But in Los Angeles, the Riviera is like, well, no, you can't. You don't just have free reign here. There are rules you have to follow and processes you have to go through. And I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting juxtaposition to sort of differentiate Kate from that whole universe that she was just a part of in Matt Fraction's Hawkeye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tucker, go.
I was just going to say, I know a little bit more about this, having read this run into, I believe it has a sort of sequel run as well, which is another Kate Bishop focused run. And then that story leads into the, I believe, 2018 West Coast Avengers run, which is not very long lived, but it establishes another small team with her and Clint and Kid Omega, and there's a Gwenpool, I think. It's a really weird team.
Yeah.
Is spun off of her adventures here, and it sort of builds this team around her and establishes, okay, what if there was a weird superhero team in Los Angeles? Of course, over there you also have the Runaways. That's a whole thing, but that being established there does give this a different tone than everything else, because you aren't just, okay, hey, it's a panel, there's the Baxter building in the background, right? You have to use the location in a little more unique way. And if it's okay, spoilers, I guess, for later in this run, but fighting on the Hollywood sign or something, but or Griffith Observatory,
end
of the last thing, like including those locations does give its unique flavor, and having it set somewhere else is the entire reason for that.
Yeah, I also like the how the art style lends itself to the setting as well. We get some Kate is multiple times throughout this volume is focusing in on like the abs of various people walking on the Venice boardwalk and stuff like that. And also just the look of it makes it look like this sort of retrofitted sort of like a Magnum PI sort of thing, which is more again private investigator stuff. But yeah, it really just matches that, and the colors, you got some oranges and some golds that match like the sun setting and stuff. It's really great.
Yeah, I agree completely. Coming more from the DC side, I mean, I definitely don't get a whole lot of this West Coast feel, but beyond the aesthetic, I think what really works
Coast
is that
City, isn't that one of the places?
That's Green Lantern.
That's.
I don't read a lot of Green Lantern. I'm gonna be honest with you, so I don't even know. I got no comment there. I'm sorry, Hal. I don't have a lot of comment on your comments.
You have a good Green Lantern comic for us, Reed. You should leave that in the comments below. Oh, okay.
And make sure it's the Sinestro Corps, because I own it and I know it's very good and I haven't read it yet.
Oh,
okay. But to get to the point I was making is that I think it's the youth of Kate's lens that makes it interesting. Your point about her looking for the hot guys on the beach, I think, is emblematic of the fact that, yeah, she brings a younger voice, a more pop culture voice, somebody who can sneak into a college library, right? And I think that helps play into the way that she brings a different perspective and is again trying to work her way up the superhero ladder here, which I just find very compelling, and that's one of the things I enjoyed the most. That said, I do think that her over reliance on pop culture references and kind of like the sassy Kate doesn't always work for me. I think sometimes it becomes a little bit too much, and it starts to trend more towards my issue with the Marvel film being that sort of overt and continuous humorous lens that starts to grate a little bit, which is why, again, I think Jessica Jones does a lot to kind of ground Kate and put her in this lens from the audience's perspective where, yeah, she is younger here and she's looking up to Jessica, and, it's Jessica's lessons that she's learning and everything. Yes. She's clearly, she's the one quipping, she's the one younger, and she's kind of in riding on the side. And I think that's where she fits really well. So I am I will say I am interested in reading the rest of the run, especially since it's only 16 issues. So I hope that her voice develops and the creative team's voice develops as they tell her story more.
Yeah. I mean, Kelly Thompson is one of my mostly because of this, one of my favorite writers in the Marvel, continuity. She does a lot of great stuff, and I do think that this story for me, as I did read it as 16 issues, is a lot better of a complete narrative of her establishing herself in LA once you've read those 16 issues. These first 6, as we said, had a little bit of pacing issue. It does push a lot of stuff into these first 4 issues in terms of, okay, she's got her business, she's got a bunch of friends that she meets really fast, their relationships established really fast, but I think that's because they wanted to be like, okay, this is entirely new, we want to get to the good stuff as soon as possible, so they just front loaded these first few issues with a lot of establishing ideas, so it makes this first arc feel a little bit overstuffed in places.
Sure. Tucker, thank you for shouting out Kelly Thompson. I don't know if I said this at the top of the episode, but obviously written by Kelly Thompson, art by Leonardo Romero. I'm not sure if I said that up top or not, but I'd like to go to our featured fan comment. This one comes from Seth, or Bethesda in our Discord server.
That was a joke.
Huh?
His name is Bethesda. It's a joke because his name is Seth and it's Bethesda.
I can't read, which is why I read comic books. I mostly just looked at the pictures.
Pretty pictures.
Yeah. But he really liked Kate Bishop's personality throughout the issues, but he feels that she never really got the chance to shine as she did in some other group partner comics that he's read with her. He also really likes the West Coast setting. It feels unique as opposed to New York City, where a lot of Marvel stuff takes place. He really enjoyed the inclusion of the Archer analysis, but didn't really like how it was incorporated into the emotional beats. That it felt a bit forced for him. The anchor points thing at the end, which I kind of also agree that they brought that around very forcibly with like, oh, and these are my anchor points. Funny how that turned out or whatever. I thought that was also a bit forced. He also as opposed to Abram, he didn't care too much for the last 2 Jessica Jones issues. He said those were the worst out of the bunch. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up for Seth. Seth, thank you very much. If you have any more comments on any comment on this or any future comics we read, again, make sure to either drop them in that Discord channel or leave them in the comments.
Or on the Twitter, where we do.
Or on the Twitter.
Tanner will be putting up posts talking about these comics, and
I will
respond there.
I'll be putting up little reminders in case you also forgot, or you've been putting it off like the 3 of us did for this time. But would you guys have anything to say about Seth's comments there?
I guess what I would say, and what I would say echoes what Tucker was talking about earlier, was the idea of the pacing and the ways that those 2 issues feel out of place. Because typically, you're looking at a 6-issue arc, an 8-issue arc, a 12-issue arc, and here we've got a 4-issue arc. And I think the problem with that is not only does the Jessica Jones content feel short, even though I like her character and the plot suffers because of that. I think the issue is that if those first 4 issues had been 6 issues instead, I think that most of the problems that are in either would have been gone. With those last 2 issues, we would have gotten to develop the I forget the names of the people around her. There's Quinn, and then the girl she rescues, and the one across the road. But it's a testament to the fact that I didn't pick that up in 4 issues because they are backgrounded, right?
Yeah.
So if this had been a more traditionally length arc instead of what I would imagine is probably like a 4-issue, this big celebrations launch the new run, right?
Sure.
If it had been a little bit slower, a little bit more traditional in terms of its scope, I think it would have gotten a lot of those issues out of the way. And then we could have brought Jessica Jones in for a second full arc, maybe with a different villain, or maybe they're going after a couple different Inhumans or something, right? I think there was room to tell both stories in a way that probably felt better.
Yeah.
Sure. But I guess the final question that I have for you guys here is, well, Tucker, I don't know if this really applies. I guess I will just answer it because Tucker's already read the rest of this run. Abram, you said that you'd be
first.
Abram, would you be interested in reading the rest of this run? And Tucker, would you be interested in rereading it?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I am, but because it is 16 issues, I think 16 issues is really digestible. That's an afternoon, and you're gonna get through that. I do have some issues with the voice. I think these first issues were messy, and because of that, had this been a much longer run, I might have given it a second trade paperback to see if my thoughts changed, but I wouldn't have committed to the whole series based off of what I read here. But the knowledge that it's a really truncated run, I just think is compelling in general. That's the way I like to read most of my comics.
Yeah.
But also it makes it easy to overlook some of these problems, knowing that the full narrative is not too far away.
Sure. I'm also interested in reading the rest of it. The shorter length also does benefit that. But I am just on face value interested in reading the rest of this because I do find Kate endearing. I like the art style and all that stuff. And an added benefit is Pizza Dog. We get a Pizza Dog tease at the end of this. So
yeah,
but yeah, I'm Tucker.
I honestly think I will reread it. I found myself just like grinning from ear to ear as I finished this up, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. There's still so much more interesting stuff. This is really just the beginning of her story here, and I think that within those 16 issues, you definitely do get a better sense of her relationship to her supporting characters and her location, as she's now has an established investigator business, and the professionally done eyeball and stuff. Like, she has Lucky to go with her. Like, there's a lot better sense of who she is now that it's established, and I think you guys will hopefully enjoy the rest of that run now that you've gotten the sort of stumbling in part introduction out of the way.
Sure. But that's our thoughts on Kate Bishop Hawkeye Volume 1 Anchor Points. Thank you so much for those who read along with us.
Yes.
But I think it's time that we announce our follow-up comic for the second episode of Back Issue Banter. All right, fellas, ready?
Yeah.
This one comes to us from Nick Brooks. He commented, he replied to our initial Back Issue Banter announcement tweet, and he recommended a few of them, but I chose out Charles Soule's Daredevil Back in Black, and I've decided we're going to do Volume 1, Chinatown.
Sure.
Right on. Shout out to Nick, by the way.
Yes, thank you so much, Nick.
He was one of my writers at CBR. It's my favorite. Don't tell anybody else. so I'm glad to see him hopping in the BLD community and giving us some suggestions. So shout out to you, Nick.
But yeah, in the future we'll probably do things that tie in. But this is a nice little reader, viewer, fan recommendation. So thank you, Nick. But yes, we'll come back with Daredevil Back in Black Volume 1, Chinatown by Charles Soule.
Great. Daredevil comics are great. I'm a big Daredevil comic fan.
Yes.
And I haven't read this one, so.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Nice. What does normal APB mean?
All police bulletin.
Oh, yeah. I've got to get on you. I wouldn't have known that.
All parade vehicle.